Hey, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Women in Youth Ministry podcast. My name is Heather Kennison, and this week's guest is Allie Johnson. Allie serves as the youth pastor at Keller United Methodist Church. Youth ministry was something Allie used to do in her free time as a volunteer, and then boom, her first appointment in the UMC was as a youth pastor. Allie loves how utterly weird youth ministry can be, how enthusiastic students are to just be themselves. Whether they're discussing Barbenheimer or theologically themed inside jokes, you can find Allie almost always laughing with her students. So Allie, welcome to the podcast. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And Allie, what I would love for you to do is share with us some kind of fun fact, completely unrelated to ministry, that you have not shared in your bio.
The thing that's springing to mind is I'm actually a huge Godzilla movie fan. Like, I've seen every Godzilla movie. I love them all. I've used them in way too many sermon illustrations. I really vibe with Godzilla.
All right, so pull on me like your best youth pastor, like string, like use something from Godzilla, make it spiritual for us.
Okay, Godzilla is, I think, a primary example of human creativity. Like, God is at God's core a creator, which means that when we're made in God's image, we are creators. And what is better to exemplify that than a movie about a giant radioactive lizard that fights other giant radioactive creatures, and the earth is hollow, King Kong is there. Like, the most ridiculous things happen in a Godzilla movie that I think can only happen because of humanity's creativity. That's my youth ministry spiel.
I love that. So share with us, you mentioned Barbenheimer in your bio. Have you seen both of them yet?
I haven't, and I'm going to just slightly blame youth ministry for that because summer is a chaos time. Mm-hmm. I've waited until this week. We're going to see Barbie on Thursday night, and then Oppenheimer will be like a nice, cool Saturday.
Yeah, that feels like the vibe. Yeah, Friday night, cool Saturday, Oppenheimer. Well, I have seen Barbie. It is lovely. You will not regret it. So if you were like a trope of youth ministry, what kind of Barbie would you be?
Oh my gosh.
Like, for me, I would be Mama Bear Barbie. Okay. Right? Like, that's my youth pastor trope.
Yeah, I'm probably like chaotic uncle Barbie. Like, so far in youth ministry, and I'm still coming into my own, but so far in youth ministry, I show up, have a good time. When people are like, what are the details? I'm like, we'll figure it out. It'll be okay. Like, let's just go have a good time. We'll figure out the details. So yeah, I'm also a big fan of the large Hawaiian shirts. That's kind of where my style fits. So yeah. Is there another term for that?
Well, you haven't seen the movie yet, so this isn't going to make sense to you, but it's going to make so much sense on Thursday. So in Barbie, Ken's one job is beach, and that's like a big joke. Is like, what's Ken's job? Beach. So maybe you're beach. Maybe that's your job.
Maybe I am beach. I just spent a week at Daytona Beach for the Youth 2023 conference, and I kind of feel like my job is beach.
Beach.
Yeah, I have the tan lines to prove it.
That's awesome. Yeah. And speaking of Daytona, Allie and I, our mutual friend, our contact is Lonnie Fancher, who just led a workshop on women in youth ministry at Youth 2023, and it went so great.
It did. It was I was already in awe of her as a woman, as a youth pastor, as a friend. But watching her give that talk and watching it be filled to the brim with students and adults was fantastic. It was inspiring.
Yeah, it was inspiring to get pictures. It's funny. I started getting pictures from people in the room, and I started texting them to a group chat that I'm in with Lonnie. And Lonnie was like, "You're such a stalker. How did you get these pictures?" I was like, "I've got people. Like, people are
Yeah.
fangirling you real hard right now." So
Yeah, people who are just excited to be there.
yeah, for sure. So you're brand new to youth ministry. You were a volunteer of Lonnie's, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
now you are a youth director, which is like, side note, every youth director's dream is to have somebody volunteering in their ministry who then is like, I'm gonna do this too. So cool.
Yeah.
So talk to us about like that decision to go from volunteering to being in youth ministry.
So I'm going to be honest, it was kind of taken out of my hands in a God way. I have been in the ordination process for the Methodist Church for a while. I've known that I wanted to go into ministry, never specifically youth ministry though. And I started volunteering with Lonnie's youth group just because I was working a very, I would call it high stress ministry job as a
Mhm.
chaplain, and I needed a little bit of my faith that was my own. Like I needed to have a spiritual outlet that was just for me, not a job. And um, and so I was a small group leader. I was a volunteer for 2 years. Had the time of my life, and it just so happened that when I finally made it to the point that I am now in the ordination process, and they said, "Hey, how do you feel about youth ministry? Can we appoint you as a youth pastor?" I was like, I had never thought of that, but yeah, yeah, you can. Like, it was almost like I was being prepared for it all along without
Mm,
even knowing it because I was looking at this as like my outlet, my me thing. My me thing was piling in a van with 40 students to go
yeah,
build a fence, you know? So yeah, it was totally serendipitous and very exciting at the same time.
very cool. So you just were a chaplain, and
Mhm.
you were a chaplain in a substance use disorder unit of a hospital. Tell us a little bit more about what your job was like, what you did.
Sure. Yeah. So I worked for the VA, which, as you know, it's the government hospital for veterans. Um, and we actually had a fairly big chaplain staff. And so the unit I was specifically assigned to was substance use disorder, as that was like my primary unit. I was the only chaplain there. And I was also secondary on a unit we called HDOM, or the Domiciliary for Care of Homeless Veterans. Basically, these two programs are part of the inpatient mental health, right? So these are longer term programs. Substance use disorder treatment usually lasts between 28 and 31 days. The domiciliary for homeless veterans is more like a 60-day program. But my units were inpatient. My veterans were in classes all day long. And so I led a group for them 2 times a week. I did individual counseling with them, kind of met with them on an as needed basis, and, just kept continually checking in with them and really following them from day one substance use treatment all the way to day 28, day 30. Where are you going next type of
Mm.
thing. Yeah.
Wow. And so you've shared with me previously that are some connections, I mean, being a chaplain in that kind of situation is obviously really difficult, but there's some ways that it has prepared you for youth ministry. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I I realized very quickly, both kind of through observing on my own, but also through doing research and learning more, right? Because I'm never going to go into a situation and be like, I know nothing, and just stay that way. I want to do my research. I want to do my homework. So I learned pretty quickly that my veterans, the guys I was seeing in substance use disorder, had a little bit of arrested development going on. And that's not to like infantilize them, that's just to speak to the reality, which is whatever age they started using substances at, and it's usually a very young age, we know that based on research. that's kind of where they're stuck
Mhm.
developmentally. And so sometimes that means that the humor is a little off. Sometimes that means that um, that sometimes that means that like they're not exercising good judgment or they're not thinking ahead, right?
Mhm.
So that kind of like emotional maturity isn't quite there yet, or yeah, the judgment, executive
Mhm.
functioning, those kinds of things. And so I figured out really quickly that like the behaviors I was seeing as a volunteer in a small group in a youth ministry were pretty much the same behaviors that I was seeing in my spirituality group that I was running. So like it was almost a one-to-one ratio of like once a week I meet with my small group, once a week I meet with this group of 15 veterans, and I'm seeing the same distraction. I'm seeing the same, um, discontent. I'm seeing the same jokes, and that kind of that showed me that there was a lot more to looking at a group of teenagers and saying they're just teenagers, or looking at a group of adult veterans with substance use disorders and saying they're drug addicts. That's all they are,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. So there's all these like similarities that you were able to draw, which has really like aided to serving in youth ministry. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense when my parents are actually drug addicts, side note. Um, and when I was growing up, I and like got my call to ministry, I always imagined that God would like keep me because I grew up in an urban part of St. Louis, that God would call me to urban ministry and then like that would be my career. And the job that opened up that felt like God was calling me to it was actually middle school ministry. And it was like at first I was like, oh, but I was really like feeling called to urban ministry, but now I'm going to be serving middle school ministry kind of in a suburban area, like what the most affluent part of Indianapolis. And I was like, these feel like they're really different from one another. But through actually backing up through an internship that I had, I realized that youth, especially middle school youth, were actually not that much different. It's the same humor, like you said, but there's also like struggles. They're just hidden more with these more
Yeah.
affluent youth. Um, and like every middle schooler, which was the job that I was stepping into, is an at-risk person.
Yeah.
Like it just looks different, but there's risks all around them and their decision making is very important. And drawing those similarities for me helped me make that switch like a little bit better.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, even thinking about, like, middle schoolers, high schoolers are just trying to figure out who they are.
Mhm.
Like, they're trying to figure out how to communicate with other people, they're trying to figure out what kind of relationships they want, how they wanna dress, how they wanna act, the movies that they love and music that they love. And in kind of a similar vein, I noticed with my veterans, struggling with substance use disorder that, like, they're also trying to figure out who they are without substances. Like, they are just trying to figure out, "Who am I? I've been this way for my entire life, for a majority of it. What do I like doing? Who do I like hanging out with? How do I want to communicate with people?" So, like, that's another big parallel where I was seeing myself work with veterans on that, and also seeing, "Oh, I should be talking to my kids about this too." Like, that's a
Definitely.
major thing to talk to students about.
Definitely. So working with these veterans as a chaplain gave you a big passion for mental health.
Mhm.
Talk to us about how that has impacted your view or the way that you serve in student ministry.
So, like, first of all, I want to dispel the notion that you're either talking about scripture or you're talking about mental health. Like, I've stepped into ministry situations where the parents have said, like, they talk too much about mental health. We just want to focus on the Bible.
Hmm.
Or, like, it has to be a one or the other thing. I think that when we are addressing spirituality, and I love the term spirituality just because it opens it up to like all parts of a person's life rather than like religion or faith, which feel like little like pieces of the pie. When we talk about spirituality, we are talking about mental health. We are addressing scripture and the Bible and being a good Christian, and that involves mental health.
Mm.
I don't know. I see like we obviously hear a ton about how this generation, and I'm using quotes because like every youth pastor knows that we're not just dealing with Gen Z anymore. We also have Gen Alpha coming up. But like everyone has been told and everyone knows that this generation struggles with mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is their number one concern. And so like I want to see what does it look like to make mental health part of the spirituality conversation, just a natural part. And I know that there are already people doing it. So I want to like emulate that and bring that into my own ministry.
So how can we do that? How can we connect our mental health, that conversation around mental health, to a conversation around spirituality?
Yeah. I think it's a lot about like educating ourselves first and foremost and figuring out like what are ways that I can talk about mental health, and also when does my job stop and I need to start figuring out like resources for my students. Because I can do some, and then I can help connect them and advocate with their parents to like find them counseling or group sessions, stuff like that. I also think a lot of mental health is emotional, like self-knowledge, emotional maturity. And that's something that like as youth ministers, we already kind of speak the language of emotions, but we can delve way more into that and talk to students about how they're feeling, how those feelings are affecting them. So like one of my favorite questions is, can you give me a feeling word? Like I'm hearing a lot from you, but can you give me a feeling word? How are you feeling?
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll even say like name 3 feeling words, and the one that like stands out most, I'm like, yeah, let's talk about like that. I hear you saying anger, like tell me where that comes from. And that's a very basic way to like work the language of empathetic listening into our ministries.
That's great. Yeah, I have in my office a feelings wheel that is, it's like laminated and like taped to the desk that people sit at when they come into my office. And whether it's staff or parents or students or volunteers, whoever it is, it's really great in a conversation to have them like name where they're at. Sometimes I would use that, especially with my Gen Z staff. I would just start off my one-on-ones with them, like just, hey, pick out a feeling for me today. Where are you at? And obviously they could always opt out, if they're just like not in the feelings mood today. But it was great because I think it's good for us to know our feelings, be able to name them, be able to describe them. There's an updated, it's like a feelings wheel, but it's like like your physical reactions version. Have you seen this?
I haven't seen it, but like I like in my head I can picture feelings wheel plus the vasovagal reactions that go along with it, right?
Yeah. So it's like, if your palms are sweaty, this is probably what you're feeling. Like if you feel your heart racing, like probably this is where you're at. And I think that's really interesting because teenagers are very much like outward in, not inward out. And so I think it helps them understand why some of their physical reactions are the way they are. So it's really cool update.
Well, in the same way that like we're like I have to practice naming my own feelings because it's not a natural language to me. Like they do too. So my students and I are practicing and learning the feelings language at the same time. It's something that takes practice.
Absolutely. What else can youth workers do to help their students with their mental health?
Destigmatizing. I think that this is a lot of where I look up to youth pastors like Lonnie. She has created a very open and trusting, safe environment in her youth group. Destigmatize, like talking more about mental health, like just calling out the fact that I know some of us in this room struggle with anxiety, and that's a pretty normal thing. Or, I know that some of us are like a little neuroatypical, that like we've got the ADHD going on, or we struggle with depression, like just creating a very normal and normalizing environment.
For sure.
And that goes for parents too, because like we all know youth ministry is youth plus parents. And our youth are, in my experience, youth are a little bit more ready to accept that normalization. And the parents are the ones who are like, shh, don't tell anyone, but my child struggles with this. I'm like, no, don't keep that a secret. A burden shared is a burden lessened, or whatever the old saying goes.
Yeah. And plus, like, most of us deal with something. I think the statistic is like 1 in 3 of Gen Z have some kind of disability when you count in mental health, ADHD, things like that. Like, so you're talking about 1 in 3 people, Gen Z, are dealing with something very individualized and needs some form of care or special attention or allowance to live their life. And I don't think that that's because Gen Z is more mentally unwell than generations before. Although I don't know, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I think it's just like this realization of like, yeah, there's like a hyper awareness to what we're feeling, what we're going through. And social media certainly exacerbates that as well. But yeah, like that's 1 in 3.
Yeah. I was having this conversation at the Youth 2023 conference with somebody. We were in a session about, I forget what specifically the session was about, but we were having this conversation, and the generational divide between me and this other woman, also in youth ministry, who was saying like, it's all social media's fault. That's why we are so mentally ill. People are like, flocking to communities that make them feel worse. And like my perspective is like, we're talking about mental health more. We're putting more vocabulary out into the world. And sometimes that is kind of that's I'm not going to lie and say it's not detrimental to some degree on social media, but like I tend to look at the positives just in general, and I think that the fact that we have this language now, we are open with the language, and we are creating spaces where people can just talk with one another about what they're going through and how they're feeling. I think that's huge, and I think that is a lot of what's driving the 1 in 3 statistic.
It's interesting that you said like that teenagers are being drawn towards communities that worsen that, because where I see teenagers being drawn towards is actually communities that give them a place of belonging. I mean, you think about, one of the big dilemmas is that kids are using or choosing their sports teams or their dance teams or whatever over youth ministry. A lot of youth ministers really lament that. But I think it's a really great thing that so many teenagers are finding a sense of belonging somewhere. Now there's some stuff wrapped up in that, like the pressure to perform or be excellent. I mean, certainly that's a part of it. But the thing that makes those teams different than church and why they're choosing that over church is because they have a place where they fit into like the puzzle or fit into the equation.
Yeah.
At church, it's kind of like this thing that they go to, not a thing that they're finding themselves or existing in.
Yeah. Like you join a soccer team because you are good at running. You are great at handling the ball. Like you join a soccer team because somebody has told you you're good at this and you belong in here. And I wonder like who looks at a youth and says you're really good at being part of this church?
Yeah.
Like you're really good at the things we do in church.
Yeah, when you play soccer, you have a very specific position you're assigned on the team, right? But then you also have like the team dynamic outside of your assigned position.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, how can I think that's another kind of basic building block of youth ministry of like, how can we affirm that our students are good at being in church, at being a member of our youth ministry? Because like if we keep affirming those good qualities and that they're doing good work, maybe we start to build the idea that, oh, I am wanted here, I am needed here, and I can create a community here, be
Mm.
part of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you want youth workers to know about students and their mental health?
What I'm going to say is going to sound super basic, but it's just that like students are like they are people, like they are themselves individuals, and they can handle tough conversations. And often students are the ones who want to have the tough conversations, and the adults around them are the ones who shy away from those conversations, are the ones who say, you're not ready yet, or that's really deep, let me find somebody else for you to talk about. And I think that just recognizing that like students are they're ready to have tough conversations. They are individuals with opinions and identities, and like if you treat them as a whole person instead of like a person in waiting,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you get to have those really cool, awesome mental health conversations. And that's when you get the kind of relationship where a student trusts you enough to come to you when when they have a problem.
Mm. That's good. They're not a person in waiting. They're a person now. They're a
Yeah,
young adult. They're a young leader. Like, this is who they are. They're not just a teen.
yeah. Well, and in my tradition, the Methodist tradition, like we confirm students into the church. And once they're confirmed in sixth or seventh grade, whenever that happens, like they are full members of the church. They're fully present. They're fully like they are members. They have some say. They have identity, and they have like the ability to make decisions, like
Absolutely.
church-wide decisions. Yeah.
Yeah. They're not adults junior. They're
Yeah.
like, I would always say that when advocating, like, these are not like junior members. Like, no, they're members. And they have something to contribute. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And making sure that like students hear that too, that you keep affirming to students like, no, we expect you to participate. We want you at church. We want you in meetings, we want you at events, we want your presence on social media, like all of those things.
Hmm.
We want you because you are a part of this church.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, there's a question we like to end every episode with, which is, we are the Women in Youth Ministry podcast. We have all genders listening, but we're a podcast that seeks to speak specifically to women. Is there anything that you'd like to share with the women listening? It could be related to your topic. It could be completely unrelated.
My completely unrelated, although kind of related thing is um I didn't want to be in youth ministry or children's ministry just because I felt like I had a bunch to prove. Like I
Mhm.
wanted to be an associate pastor or pastor in charge of finance or a senior pastor because like I wanted to be on top, and like
Mhm.
I felt like I had that to prove that a woman could do that. But I have found so much like I found so much friendship and growth and fulfillment in youth ministry that for the longest time I avoided because I didn't want to be seen as just the woman in
Mhm.
youth ministry or just the woman in children's ministry. And so, like, kind of letting go of those stigmas that I held myself to was really instrumental in stepping into this ministry that I love, that I found a lot of fulfillment in.
Mm. That's good. That's good. Well, it was a joy, Allie, to get to meet you and to have you on the podcast. I'm just curious, do you open up your social media for people to follow if anyone wants to get in touch with you?
Sure. I will warn people I'm not super active, but feel free to like check me out over on Instagram is really my main one. I'm at ordinarily Allie.
I love that. What a fun name.
Thanks.
Awesome, Allie. Well, thanks for being on, and thanks everybody for listening. We will see you very soon.